Welcome to Personal Injury Claims Explained by Foyle Legal, your trusted source for personal injury claims in Western Australia. Each week, we simplify complex legal issues, from motor vehicle accidents to workplace injuries, so you can confidently navigate your rights and secure the compensation you deserve.
Welcome back, everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into a topic that's both important and, frankly, a little daunting: motor vehicle accident claims here in Western Australia.
It's daunting, yeah.
But don't worry, we're going to break it all down and make sure you walk away feeling informed and confident about your rights.
Absolutely.
And to make it even more real, we're going to use an actual case,
Yeah.
2016 WADC 164, to illustrate how these accidents, especially those involving whiplash, can impact someone's life in ways you might not expect.
That's right. We often hear about whiplash, but this case really shows how it can linger.
And to understand the legal side of things, we'll be referencing Foyle Legal's blog, which is like a gold mine of information on this
Oh,
topic.
for sure. They break down those complicated WA laws in plain English.
All right, let's dive into the case, shall we? Now, to protect privacy, we'll refer to the individual involved as the plaintiff.
Sounds good.
So the plaintiff's story begins back on May 25th, 2013. Picture this. They're a passenger in a car traveling along Southwest Highway. Suddenly, another car runs a red light and slams right into their side. Boom.
Oh, wow.
The force of the impact was so strong that it actually sent their car careening across the road.
Oof. That sounds serious.
Yeah, definitely not your average fender bender.
Not at all.
And this brings us to the legal stuff. You know, the rules of the game here in WA.
Right, the framework.
We're talking about the Civil Liability Act of 2002 and the Motor Vehicle Third-Party Insurance Act of 1943.
Big names, but essentially they help determine who's at fault.
Exactly, and how much compensation the injured party might be entitled to.
The first act, the Civil Liability Act, is all about proving negligence.
Negligence, like carelessness that led to the accident.
Exactly. And the second act, the Motor Vehicle Act, that clarifies how insurance works in these situations, who pays for the damages and such.
Makes sense. So those acts are kind of like the rule book, but how do they affect our plaintiff?
Well, that's where the case details come in.
Right. The case file mentions the plaintiff was initially diagnosed with soft tissue injuries, but I feel like that term can be kind of vague,
Yeah, it is a broad term, definitely.
What does it actually mean in a practical sense?
Well, soft tissue injuries, it basically covers any damage to muscles, ligaments, and tendons.
Ah, so not broken bones, but still potentially very painful.
Absolutely.
And in this case, the plaintiff specifically suffered whiplash, affecting their neck and lower back.
Ouch.
Yeah, the report even mentions their arm hitting the window on impact, so you can imagine the force involved.
Right, so it's not just a simple neck strain.
Not at all, and as we'll see, the impacts of these injuries, especially the whiplash, were far from temporary for the plaintiff.
That's what makes this case so interesting. It goes beyond that initial diagnosis and shows how these things can linger.
Exactly, and that's what we'll explore as we delve deeper into the plaintiff's experience.
The long-term stuff.
Exactly, the stuff that isn't always obvious.
Right, the stuff that can be hard to prove.
Okay, so we've set the scene, this car accident. Not just a fender bender.
Yeah, major impact.
And we've got these injuries, especially whiplash.
Whiplash to the neck and lower back, yeah.
But it's the long-term effects we're really interested in, right?
Exactly, because those initial soft tissue injuries, they weren't just a temporary thing for the plaintiff.
That's what's crazy.
Yeah, the whiplash, it actually became chronic, like a long-term condition.
Wow, so not just a few weeks of pain and then back to normal.
Nope, this was ongoing, impacting their daily life.
And that's where things get tricky, right?
Yeah.
Proving that kind of invisible long-term pain.
It can be, yeah, because you can't always see it on an x-ray or anything.
But it's real, and it affects everything.
Absolutely.
And to make matters worse, the case file mentions that the plaintiff already had depression.
Oh, right.
And guess what? It got significantly worse after the accident.
Oh, it's not uncommon, actually. Yeah, chronic pain and depression, they can often go hand in hand.
Wow. I guess it makes sense. If you're constantly in pain, it's going to affect your mood.
Exactly. And the case file actually notes that medical professionals believe the plaintiff's depression was likely made worse by the chronic pain from the whiplash.
So not only are they dealing with the physical pain, but also the emotional toll of a worsening mental health condition.
Right. It's like a double whammy.
And this brings us to the real-life impact of this accident.
Okay.
Because at the time, the plaintiff was working as a childcare worker.
Oh, wow. That's a physically demanding job.
Exactly. Lots of lifting, bending, being on your feet all day.
I can't imagine doing that with chronic neck and back pain.
And you don't have to imagine, because the plaintiff actually describes their struggles in the case file.
They do.
Yeah, they talk about struggling to lift the kids, not being as efficient at work, needing to take time off because of the pain.
Oh, that's rough.
But here's the thing. Even with all that pain, they often pushed through and went to work anyway.
Why would they do that?
Financial pressure, plain and simple.
Right. Bills don't stop coming just because you're injured.
Exactly. And the case file even mentions the plaintiff coming home after work, completely exhausted and in pain, relying on painkillers and heat packs just to get through the evening.
So their whole life was affected, not just their work.
Absolutely. And that's where I think seeking legal help, like the kind Foyle Legal provides, can make a world of difference.
I agree, because they understand how to navigate these complex cases, gather the right evidence, and really fight for their clients' best interests.
Speaking of evidence, the case file actually points out some discrepancies between what the medical report said and what the plaintiff was actually experiencing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, some reports kind of downplayed the severity of the pain.
While the plaintiff was saying something different.
Exactly. Their testimony painted a much more vivid picture of their struggles.
That's so important.
It is, and it makes me wonder, how can someone in that situation make sure their voice is truly heard?
That's where having a good legal team comes in.
Like Foyle Legal.
Exactly, because they specialize in gathering evidence that supports their clients' claims.
So more than just medical reports.
Right. They might get witness statements from colleagues or family members who've seen the plaintiff struggling, or even documentation from their workplace, like performance reviews or attendance records.
So it's about building a complete picture, not just relying on a doctor's opinion.
Exactly. And that's especially crucial with an injury like whiplash, which, as we've discussed, can be tough to prove.
Because it's not always visible.
Right. It's not like a broken bone that shows up clearly on an X-ray.
So having that legal team to connect the dots to explain how the injury has affected the person's life, that's essential.
It is, because ultimately it's about getting the plaintiff the compensation they deserve.
Compensation for the pain, the suffering, the lost wages, all of it.
Exactly, because this accident has had a real tangible impact on their life, and that needs to be acknowledged.
Absolutely, and that's what we're going to explore further as we continue our deep dive into this case. So we've talked about the accident, the injuries, the impact on the plaintiff's life, and the role of legal expertise.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is, but I think it's really important to understand all these different facets of motor vehicle accident claims,
Definitely.
because it's not just about knowing the law. It's about understanding how it affects real people.
Right, the human side of it all.
Exactly, and I think this case really highlights that human impact.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the legal jargon, but at the end of the day, it's about a person whose life has been turned upside down.
And that brings up a bigger question, I think.
Okay.
How do we, as a society, balance individual responsibility with the need to support those who are injured because of someone else's negligence?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yes, right.
Because we want people to be accountable for their actions, especially on the road. But we also need to make sure that those who are injured through no fault of their own have the support they need to recover.
Right. It's like finding that sweet spot between holding people responsible and offering compassion.
Exactly. And it's an ongoing conversation, for sure.
And maybe cases like the one we've been discussing can help guide that conversation.
Yeah, by showing the real-world consequences of these accidents.
And by highlighting the challenges people face when trying to navigate the legal system.
Right, because it's not always easy or straightforward.
Not at all. So as we wrap up our deep dive, I think it's important to remind everyone that this was just one case, one story.
One example.
And
Yeah.
while we can learn a lot from it, every situation is unique.
Absolutely.
What might be a clear-cut case for one person could be incredibly complex for someone else.
That's true.
So the key takeaway here, I think, is knowledge is power.
Always.
If you're ever involved in a motor vehicle accident, take the time to understand your rights under WA law.
Right. Don't just assume you know how it all works.
And gather all the evidence you can, even if it seems small or insignificant.
Because every detail can matter.
Exactly. And most importantly, don't be afraid to seek professional legal advice.
Because they can help you make sense of it all and advocate for your best interests.
Resources like Foyle Legal's blog are a great starting point.
Yeah, they have tons of information on their website.
And their team of experts can offer personalized guidance tailored to your specific circumstances.
Because ultimately, it's about getting the support you need to navigate this challenging process.
And to make sure you're treated fairly.
Exactly.
So that's it for our deep dive into motor vehicle accident claims in WA.
Hope it was helpful.
We hope you found it informative and empowering.
Yeah, knowledge is power.
Remember, stay safe on the roads, and if you ever need help after an accident, don't hesitate to reach out for professional guidance.
You don't have to go through it alone.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
See it.
Thanks for tuning in to Personal Injury Claims, explained by Foyle Legal. Remember, this podcast is for informational purposes and isn't legal advice. For advice specific to your situation, visit us at Foyle Legal. And don't forget to subscribe or leave a review.